When I think of Resident Evil, a distinct memory comes to mind. It was 2011. I was in a Blockbuster, which was how us old people often rented movies and games, and while I was walking around the store as a 9-year-old being supervised by my mom, I remember coming upon one of those cheesy Resident Evil movies. I'd seen that name on game covers before, but I didn't think much of it. Leaving the store after my mom let me rent some PG game for the PS2, I thought about Resident Evil again in the car. And for over a decade after that moment, I continued to be reminded of the franchise every now and then when I'd hear game announcements, see articles, or just find one of Capcom's many Steam sales for the games. But you know what? I never once touched the franchise. That is, until last year when Resident Evil Requiem was announced. At last, I decided, hey, Requiem's about to come out, and these games are clearly beloved by millions of fans for a reason, so it's about time I find out if all the hype about this gigantic franchise is really justified. After combing through all of the stuff you should know in the franchise, from games like RE0 all the way to 9 and everything in between, I can finally explain to you the full picture and timeline of what its story is all about, placing the latest title in context with the others. And after beating 9 and getting both endings, I can confidently say it freaking slaps and is perhaps the most important game as far as lore that we've seen yet. In this video, we'll cover it all. Where did the viruses begin? What new big bads will we discover in Requiem? And does Leon survive? Please don't kill my boy, he's too handsome. If you like this video, be sure to lick the like button in the face and enjoy the full story of Resident Evil Explained. Before we get into the story, I do want to very quickly explain how I chose which games and media to cover here, and which ones to leave out, since some of you might be curious about that. Generally, any games, films, shows, and comics that Capcom released after 2005, including remakes of much older games, are considered canon. Before 2005, there was some media, including live-action movies, that are most definitely not canon, and Capcom realized in the early 2000s they wanted to have more cohesion and consistency in their universe, hence why they decided to put more time into it. This means we'll be covering all the numbered Resident Evil games, as well as most relevant side ones, including Umbrella Chronicles, Outbreak File 1 and 2, Code Veronica, and of course the Revelations games. We'll also be covering the relevant CGI movies and comics along the way, since some of those are important too. But enough about the specifics. For those of you who know as much about Resident Evil as I did a few months ago, which is to say basically nothing at all, well, what is this franchise about? Well, it's about bioweapons, viruses, all those fun little things. Resident Evil is also about companies and their financial obligations, their thirst for funding. Just like my own company, which is exactly why I need to make you aware of a highly praised game called Soul Mask, the sponsor of this video. Up until now, Soul Mask has been available on Steam in early access, but on April 10th, the ancient civilization-themed survival sandbox game will fully launch into its 1.0 version, together alongside its brand new DLC, The Shifting Sands. Soul Mask up until now had been drawing inspiration from South American civilizations for its dense world building, and its new Egyptian-based DLC takes you to a new continent entirely, exploring ancient Egyptian civilizations. What's cool about this new DLC is that it can be played without completing the base game first. In Shifting Sands, you'll face huge bosses with awesome rewards while obtaining multiple powerful and stylish masks along the way to make yourself into an unstoppable god with countless unique abilities. Outside the masks themselves, the new DLC also has an insanely cool system for building large airships, allowing you to basically create your own flying home. The new DLC also has lore and a story of its own that I'll be diving into in a future video, so stay tuned for that project coming real soon. Whether you just like to explore ancient Egyptian civilizations, fight epic bosses, or conquer the local tribes with your godlike mask powers, Soul Mask's new Shifting Sands DLC is worth checking out. Play Soul Mask today on Steam with the link in the description or pinned comment, and stay tuned for the game's full launch into 1.0 alongside its Shifting Sands DLC on April 10th. And again, a big thanks to Soul Mask for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to Resident Evil. Our story begins in 1909 in a remote village in Eastern Europe. A woman named Miranda had a daughter, whom she named Ava. 10 years later, in 1919, the Spanish flu swept over the region and snuffed out the life of the then 10-year-old Ava. After her daughter was buried, Miranda couldn't live with herself anymore and went to a mysterious cave to die so she could be with her child again. But instead of dying, Miranda found something there that would change the history of humanity. She found a big old fungus, heart-looking mold thing called the megamycete. And when she touched it, Miranda saw the memories of a bunch of people who had died, been buried, and then got absorbed into this entity through the ground, including her very daughter. By touching the mushroom, Miranda became infected by it, but instead of merging with the mold, she remained intact. Seeing the visions of countless deceased people, she was all like, wait a second, I can bring my daughter back to life, and proclaimed the mushroom or mold as the Black God. This led to her starting a religion of which she was the self-proclaimed prophet of the Black God. Spreading the religion and infection to her fellow villagers, she actually managed to cure their ailments, healing the sick with the mold's properties. Her goal in establishing power was not simply for the benefit of the villagers, though. She was going to bring back her daughter no matter the cost. In gaining the support of her village, she began doing science experiments using the mold, eventually leading to her inventing something she called the cadeau. Basically, this was a parasite infected with the mold that had very unstable properties. With the cadeau, she sought to create a host person suitable for Ava's personality and memories to be transferred into. Seemingly, this host needed to be real strong for this to work, though, and the cadeau was kind of a test of strength for its soon thereafter victims. Miranda wasted no time before she experimented on most of the people in town with her cadeau. A majority of them ended up either dying or transforming into creatures called lycans, which were basically werewolves. Of the countless failed experiments, 8, however, were successful, 4 of which being the direct descendants of the ancient Four Lords, which had previously ruled over the region long ago. These include characters which you've probably seen before, like the 9'6" Alcina Dimitrescu, the decrepit Salvatore Moreau, the doll-wielding Donna Beneviento, and this certified metal bender Karl Heisenberg. But we'll get into these curious characters later on because there's one man in particular that we must cover first and foremost, who would go on to change the world in the worst possible ways. In the 1950s, this man got lost in the Eastern European mountains, being discovered eventually by Miranda. Oswell E. Spencer came from a rich, elite European family, and as he grew into a strapping young man, he studied at a prestigious institution to become a physician, making 2 rather important friends along the way, Edward Ashford and Dr. James Marcus. They'll come in soon enough. It was in the 1950s that, on a hiking expedition, Spencer got lost and was rescued by Miranda. But instead of going on his merry way, Bro decided that what Miranda was doing was sick as fuck, and he trained with her as basically her apprentice. He was 27 at this time and was hungry for knowledge, especially if it meant he could change the world with said knowledge. See, Spencer really wanted to evolve humanity because he saw how humans always tend to resort to war, and he basically pulled a Sam Altman and just saw humans, as they naturally come, as wildly inefficient. Bro wanted to optimize human genetic code. After respectfully parting ways with Miranda, Spencer went back to his university and started a secret group of scientists to do research that could change the world. Spencer wanted to make bioweapons and viruses and stuff, but his main obsession was eugenics. Either way, he was exploring all of his options to evolve humanity. Alright, so we fast forward to 1966, right? Spencer and his circles start investigating this West African tribe called the Nidapaya that historically used a mysterious flower called the Stairway of the Sun. The flower, which was highly poisonous, killed most people, but to those who didn't outright die, it allegedly gave them godlike strength. Spencer's buddy James Marcus was like, yo, we should go check that out. So Spencer sent Marcus and another researcher, Brandon Bailey, to go and research it. They studied the flower under hostile circumstances as the Nidapaya were constantly attacking them, but eventually they made progress. Marcus and Bailey returned to Spencer in the United States with the data, but found that extracting the virus from it had only worked in the local environment where the flower grew. It wasn't working anywhere else. Spencer was getting pretty fed up with this shit by 1967, but Marcus was still obsessed with the flowers. Him and Bailey further colonized that little flower growing spot, even killing the Nidapaya if they had to, and they successfully managed to extract the virus at last, dubbing the then incomplete virus the progenitor virus. So Spencer at this point is like, oh, okay, now I'm interested. And from then on, he started to do some really fucked up shit. Progenitor was huge for Spencer. By now, the man was 44 years old, filthy fucking rich, and desired glorious evolution in any way possible. With his wealth, he had created many different business ventures, including the Spencer Foundation, which he recruited Marcus to come work under in the States. Spencer had a very talented architect named George Trevor build him a huge mansion estate in the fictional Arklay Mountains in the Midwest United States, this thing being riddled with traps and evil shit. Spencer was just fucking weird. And he also used the same architect to build a gigantic laboratory underneath his estate. But then Spencer had a paranoid realization. He thought to himself, wait a second, now the architect who designed my super evil facility knows everything about my super evil facility because he literally designed the entire thing. I think I need to kill him and his family. Except, you want to know what Spencer did instead? Something so much worse. He invited George and his wife and daughter to stay at the new estate with him for a week. Except Spencer had no vacation planned for the family. He was going to kidnap the architect and his family and use them as human test subjects for the progenitor virus. Bro, why would the guy who made this estate and the traps within it let his wife and kid vacation there? What the fuck was he thinking? Either way, George was running late, but he told his wife and daughter to go on ahead of him while he finished up some work. After Jessica and Lisa arrived at Spencer's estate, Bro took them and drugged them. Spencer wanted to gain data on the virus, and the wife and daughter seemed like perfect test subjects for 2 different strains of the progenitor. The wife, Jessica, died from being injected with the type A progenitor virus strain, and the daughter, Lisa, was injected with the type B, but she survived. Over time, she gradually mutated worse and worse, but was still alive, gaining near immortality. She was mentally and physically dilapidated, and the sick fuck that Spencer was just kept her imprisoned in their facility. The dad, George, arriving late several days later, met with Spencer and was told by him that his family left to go visit their aunt. George believed Spencer, but he was a little skeptical, continuing to stay at Spencer's for a few days before he too was drugged. He tried to escape, but because of his drugged state, he ended up stumbling into one of his own traps and got stuck in a pit, dying of malnutrition and thirst many days later. So by now, you should really hate Spencer. But oh, this is just the start. In 1968, Spencer funds the construction of an entire facility in the West African caves, all under his newly created corporation, one you've most definitely heard the name of before. Oh yeah, I'm talking about Umbrella Corps, the logo design of which was taken from the symbol of the 4 lords back in Miranda's village. See, it's all connected. Now, Spencer wasn't quite done with his insane paranoia, though. In 1968, Spencer's colleague Edward Ashford and Edward's son Alexander were virus connoisseurs who had knowledge of Spencer and his projects. The Ashfords had different goals for the progenitor virus and moved on to an Antarctic facility for a separate project. But due to Spencer's paranoia that Ashford would get in his way or betray him, he had Edward killed and Alexander sent to the Ashford-owned prison island in the southern Pacific Ocean, which will be important later. Spencer is just a paranoid little freak man, pulling all the strings. Alright, so fast forward 10 years. Lisa, the little girl turned brain-damaged monster, was still just living in or around Spencer's facility and estate in the Arklay Mountains, and around this time, the West African facility's construction had been finalized. Dr. Marcus, still obsessed with the flower research back in Africa, requested 5 progenitor virus samples to be sent from the African research facility to where he was in the US. A month later, on January 13th of 1978, Dr. Marcus sent a simple telegram message back to the research center. T-virus development a success. He had done it. This was the first instance of the T-virus that could actually be used as a proper bioweapon, specifically utilizing leeches. On the other hand, Spencer was working on other big research in the field of eugenics. Spencer realized that the biggest change he could make in the world was by utilizing the youth, so he began testing on them. With his Spencer Foundation, he was kidnapping kids from their families and raising them in lab environments. Spencer specifically took highly intelligent kids as he believed they would be good hosts for a later, more developed progenitor virus. These kids were stripped of their identities and renamed the Weskers after a lead researcher, who we know very little about. By now, Spencer and Marcus were the only 2 big researchers at Umbrella doing crazy shit and making big developments, as far as Spencer was concerned. They were competitive and neither really trusted each other. Marcus progressed from using animal testing to testing on human children. Spencer continued to grow paranoid about Marcus, eventually having one of his Weskers, Albert, spy on him. So Albert worked alongside another prodigal young researcher named William Birkin. Both Albert and William worked for Umbrella, and they started to gain the trust of Marcus over time. But in 1988, Birkin, Wesker, and some other Umbrella soldiers were ordered to murder Dr. James Marcus and steal his research, so Spencer could have it.
I will take over your research.
But see, this is where Spencer really fucked up, because even though he had Marcus killed, and him and his leeches just dumped into a river, Bro was going to haunt Umbrella from the watery grave. Marcus's queen leech he had developed before his death entered his corpse and basically merged with him, eating his brain and gaining his memories. Thinking it was Marcus himself reborn, the queen leech transformed itself into this twink, a version of what Marcus looked like when he was younger. From there, the disguised Queen Leech patiently schemed to get revenge for its deceased host and royally fuck over Spencer and Umbrella as a whole, leading to the culmination of its plan 10 years later in 1998. And this is where shit gets real. Before we can really talk about the incident, you need to understand a rather important metropolis called Raccoon City. From around the 1960s to 1998, Raccoon City had huge amounts of funding and support from Umbrella Corps, which contributed to its growth, making the city a center stage for its research. Thus, its population grew to over 100,000. Because Umbrella employed about 30% of the city's workers, the mega corporation had huge ties to it. As Raccoon City was close in proximity to the Arklay Mountains, Umbrella established a tram network to connect Spencer's estate to the city, among other hotspots in the area. The Queen Leech, who had been in hiding for 10 years, knew about Raccoon City quite well because of this, and because of the fact that it had Marcus's memories. With that context in mind, the plans were set in motion in early 1998. The Queen Leech, which from here on we'll just refer to as Twink Marcus, caused a T-virus outbreak in the Arklay laboratories and Spencer Mansion, causing multiple human and dog zombies to escape the facility and infect people, including hikers and other randos. The Raccoon City Police Department tried and failed to figure out what the fuck was going on with these attacks, so eventually they called in their Special Tactics and Rescue Service team, the STARS. Fast forward to July 23rd, 1998. Twink Marcus was about to use the Arklay tram network to cause irreversible damage by spreading the T-virus further than he had by that point. That same night, STARS' Bravo team were investigating the area to figure out the murders. They flew over the woods by helicopter when an unknown engine fail occurred, leading to an emergency landing and the discovery of murdered soldiers. On the remains of the deceased, the squad found information about a prisoner, ex-Lieutenant Billy Cohen. The man was sentenced for execution but was clearly on the loose in the forests of the Arklay Mountains. Rebecca Chambers, a medic and security officer on the Bravo team, discovered a stationary train on some railroad tracks. She entered in search of Billy, but discovered the train was filled with undead passengers, and she was locked inside. While investigating the train himself, Billy Cohen went on to find Rebecca. Did I mention the train started, by the way? It was just barreling down the tracks by now. While Rebecca was skeptical of Billy's trustworthiness at first, the two of them eventually teamed up, desperately stopping the train as it crashed into a tunnel underneath the Umbrella Executive Training School, which is where Marcus had been doing his T-virus research all those years before. As Rebecca and Billy made it out of the tunnel and into the complex, Albert Wesker and William Birkin watched them through facility cameras, observing the duo. Their spying was interrupted though as Twink Marcus showed up on one of their screens with something to say. Basically, he was like, yeah, so I was the one who spread the T-virus in Spencer's mansion. Also, you guys fucking suck. Rebecca and Billy searched the training complex for answers, which Twink Marcus responded to by sending rabid infected apes after them. All the while, Wesker told Birkin he was gonna ditch Umbrella Corps altogether, seeing it as a sinking ship, given the situation. Wesker simply wanted to test the T-virus in a combat scenario before he left the facilities completely and moved on. He told Birkin that to do this, he'd utilize his leadership position with STARS to lure some of his subordinates to Spencer's mansion and test how some of his armed soldiers would respond to T-virus zombies. Birkin, on the other hand, didn't want to leave Umbrella just yet because he was working on something called the Golgotha virus, short for G-virus. This one was more powerful than T, but it's going to come in later on. As Wesker was leaving Birkin in an elevator, Birkin said he'd arm a self-destruct device in the training center's basement to destroy the evidence of Twink Marcus. But it's like, bro, the virus is still out there in other places. It's breached containment at this point, so what's that really gonna do? Rebecca and Billy get split up, and after entering an elevator, Rebecca finds her lost squad member, Enrico. Why do I get the feeling this guy's not gonna live more than like 5 seconds?
All right, just be careful.
I never saw him again.
Okay, yep, called it. After she searched through an Umbrella-operated sewer system, Rebecca found Billy, who'd previously gotten swept downstream. And from there, they found Twink Marcus's gooning room, where he trauma dumps to them about Marcus's assassination. Rebecca and Billy decided to let him yap for a bit, but eventually they had to put him down. And this guy just fucking refused. Using the power of sunlight and a fucking magnum, they deliver the final blow to the Queen Leech and escape the facility as it self-destructs. Boom. Unscathed, but most likely mega exhausted, Billy and Rebecca took a moment atop a cliff's edge to just have a breather. Rebecca told Billy that she'd help him fake his death as a way to protect him from being pursued. And from there, the two of them split up. Rebecca headed to Spencer's mansion, and this leads us to the game that started it all, Resident Evil 1. Before we get to that though, let's just take a time out. This video is first and foremost intended to be digestible, so let's slow down, take a sip of water, and briefly recap everything that just happened so we can actually absorb this insane, convoluted story. It all started with Miranda and the Megamycete. Spencer met her and they did evil gooning experiments together before eventually parting ways because each had different goals. Spencer and his boys discovered the funny African flower and committed unfathomable colonization against the tribal natives who originally found it. Spencer makes Umbrella Corps, builds so much infrastructure, privately subsidizes a huge amount of Raccoon City's funding, and therefore its continued growth. Then, as he got old, bro got paranoid and killed off most of his day ones, as well as the architect that built his fancy-ass mansion. Then he infected the architect's daughter, proceeding to experiment and torment her for fucking decades. Still, Spencer won his real zero. From there, Spencer's only real competition left alive, Dr. Marcus, was promptly made not alive. But as we know, Marcus's corpse combined with his Queen Leech to rebirth Twink Marcus, who plotted his revenge and caused the T-Virus to escape laboratories, even infecting Spencer's mansion. Stars were investigating murders in Arklay Mountains, which led to Rebecca and Billy doing their things in Marcus's training facility, all leading up to it getting exploded. Okay, and with that, we're all caught up. Shall we continue? So remember how Rebecca was on the Stars Bravo team? Well, it being the B team implies that there was an Alpha or A team. And as it turns out, there was. After B team went silent at the start of the events of Resident Evil 0, the next day, on July 24th, A team eventually did a helicopter search for them and they found B team's downed helicopter. Led by our very evil but pretending to be good friend, Albert Wesker, A team followed a trail in the nearby woods where they were ambushed by a pack of zombie dogs. Surviving A-Team members ran for their lives and made it to what they assumed was a random mansion. But this was no accident. This mansion was the Spencer estate that Wesker knew was infected by zombies. He would use it as a testing ground to see how his squad would react. And speaking of that squad, allow me to introduce some of the key members, the few survivors of the mission. Chris Redfield is this hunk of meat you've probably seen punt a fucking boulder with his bare fists in RE5. Jill Valentine is a woman, which meant the Resident Evil developers flipped a coin to decide whether or not they'd use her character for infinite tentacle porn scenes in every mainline appearance of her until the end of time. Oh yeah, and I guess she's also like a member of Stars. Then we got Barry Burton, who's just kind of there. He's like a friend of Chris's, and also part of Stars, of course. He's actually going to be very important in the story much later on. And last but not least, we got Wesker, which again, if it isn't obvious by now, is acting as a double agent. He's both the captain of Alpha Squad and he's working for Umbrella. He also becomes the franchise's big bad villain for many games to come. With those brief introductions out of the way, we continue into the Spencer estate. Jill, Chris, and Wesker make it into the mansion after getting split up with Barry. This is going off Umbrella Chronicles, by the way, since it's told from Wesker's perspective. Anyway, Chris and Jill find a zombie as they're proceeding through the mansion and eventually come across another member of their team, Richard, who'd been bitten by a giant snake. Right there next to him is Rebecca, who found her way into the mansion after all the shit she'd just gone through the previous night. Desperate for answers, Chris and Jill headed further into the mansion while leaving Rebecca to take care of Richard. It didn't take long for Chris and Jill to then stumble into the underground facility beneath the mansion, where they came face to face with Wesker, his facade fully dropped. Bro basically told him, yeah, so I'm evil, I set this whole thing up, I don't even need Umbrella anymore, and also, look at this thing. It's really cool. Chris, Jill, and Rebecca escaped the facility via helicopter right after a boss fight with the Tyrant. But before the facility self-destructed, Wesker woke up, literally reborn after dying from the whole impaling thing. But why the fuck did he come back to life? Well, as it turns out, Birkin had previously injected Wesker with a T-virus strain that would mutate and activate when he was close to death. As he was then activated with superhuman powers, Wesker escaped the facility right before it exploded in a fiery blast. But this is where the big events of Resident Evil truly begin. What happened next would show how the vulnerable city nearby faced an unprecedented outbreak, leading to a point of no return. In the following months, a couple important things happened with our established characters and with Umbrella and other corporations. We're still in 1998, by the way. In August, Chris Redfield traveled to Europe to investigate Umbrella. Jill Valentine continued to live in Raccoon City, and Rebecca Chambers, having had enough of Umbrella and all this Stars shit, just moved away. As far as corporations go, interested parties took note of what happened at the Spencer estate and Arklay facilities. But still, the whole disaster was kept away from the public eye. Consequences have actions though, and thousands of innocent people were about to have their lives uprooted. The Queen Leech was dead, so at the very least the leech situation had been dealt with back in RE0. However, a successful leak of the T-Virus was about to happen, directly underneath Raccoon City no less. Remember William Birkin? Well, he was still intent on completing his T and G virus research in facilities underneath the city. He negotiated with the US Army to ensure his eventual evacuation and safety, since by now Umbrella was beginning to be under heavy scrutiny by many parties. Furthermore, Birkin promised to provide his research to the US Army in exchange for him and his family being placed under witness protection. On September 23rd, though, one of Umbrella's special security squads were sent down into Birkin's facility to execute the man because they had found out that he was basically a mole. Once they reached Birkin, they mag dumped him and took his T and G virus samples. However, bro somehow didn't die from their cacophony of bullets and managed to inject himself with a G virus sample they didn't grab. This made him go Insano style, and he slaughtered most of the squad. He ate up the remaining G virus samples they'd taken away like they were fucking edibles, and this made him even stronger. But Birkin failed to deal with or even care about the T virus samples, which had been smashed open. Rats came along, lapped up the T virus samples, and this led to the water supply getting infected with the virus. Subsequently, most of the city was infected as a result. Back on the street level of Raccoon City, zombies were abound. By now, many thousands of people had been turned or infected by the tainted water. Military and local police response was there, but they were absolutely unprepared for the sheer force of the virus. After all, how could they possibly be prepared? Selfish, greedy, unimaginably irresponsible corporations with psychotic leadership up and down the chains of command had caused this entire thing, and most people couldn't even begin to understand what had happened before it was too late. Enter Resident Evil 3. Remember Jill, the STARS Alpha team member? Well, she's been doing her homework ever since escaping with her friends from that nightmare earlier. She's been investigating Umbrella Corps, because they're obviously sus. She's just chilling in her apartment when suddenly she gets a call from her STARS friend Brad, which, by the way, is not Barry. Two characters that start with B. Don't really matter that much, but this is Brad, and that's Barry. Okay, let's move on. Brad tells her to fucking run, and before she even has a second to process what's happening,
Let me grab my...
a giant tyrant called the Nemesis was sent by Umbrella to kill Jill. And after she narrowly escapes him, leaving her apartment, she's then chased by this fuck-ass dude throughout Raccoon City. She's about to get royally obliterated by the Nemesis, but then Jill is saved by Carlos Oliveira, who works for the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, or the UBCS. From there, Jill has to run around Raccoon City to power the subway station so a bunch of civilians can escape. All the while, she's chased by the Nemesis and UBCS member Nikolai, this Russian guy who's only after his own best interest. Jill and Carlos save each other and become buddies. They get the subway station up and running, and Jill gets on the subway. Carlos and Tyrell, a UBCS friend, go out to find Dr. Nathaniel Bard, a scientist who's the head of some Umbrella Corps research. Bard was apparently the only person who knew how to make vaccines, and he also knew about Umbrella's corruption, so he was a liability. While they look for Bard, Nemesis destroys the subway, but it gets knocked out from an explosion, as does Jill. Also, Nikolai escapes. Carlos goes into the Raccoon City Police Department with Tyrell to try and find Dr. Bard, and bro actually calls them on the telly and tells them he's stuck in the hospital with no way out, but he has vaccines. Jill radios Carlos and tells him that her train was destroyed by Nemesis, and then, what do you know, Nemesis attacks her and her radio goes silent. Naturally, Carlos goes after her. Jill and Nemesis fight, Jill beats it, but not for long because Jill walks over his corpse and is attacked again, this time being infected with a virus bullet. Nikolai shows up to just kind of taunt her, and then 3 business days later, Carlos finds Jill and picks her up to take her to the hospital. He then searches the hospital to find vaccines and Dr. Bard. But before we find out what happened to Jill and Carlos, allow me to calmly whiplash you to another character's journey. See, Jill is all like zzz in the hospital, and while she does that, it's around this time when the events of RE Outbreak take place. This is where we follow a particularly cunning reporter and how she deals with the current diabolical nightmare consuming the city. Also, she's the eventual mother of Grace, who we play as in RE9 Requiem, so this is important. Trust. Alright, let's go back in time a little bit. Alyssa Ashcroft grew up in Raccoon City and became a journalist as an adult. In 1993, she investigated a small hospital in the Arklay Mountains with her fellow reporter buddy, Kurt. The pair had heard rumors that there was corruption in the institution, and as it turned out, there was corruption. The hospital director, Albert Lester, not Albert Wesker by the way, was taking bribes from Umbrella Corps researcher Greg Mueller to test a strain of T-virus on cancer patients. The director had a personal interest in this as well, since his wife Dorothy was terminally ill. The strain worked at first, but then most test subjects died, and Dorothy turned into a zombie, wreaking havoc within the hospital. While Alyssa and Kurt investigated the hospital, Kurt was attacked and killed by Dorothy. Alyssa tried to escape, but she was captured by the Umbrella researcher Greg Mueller and had her memories of the event wiped, basically. Despite getting amnesia of the event, she kept being a dope-ass reporter, chasing stories in the Arklay region wherever she could. Fast forward back to 1998 when all the shit went down and zombies were roaming throughout Raccoon City. Similar to Jill from just a moment ago, Alyssa too got infected during the Raccoon City disaster. But Alyssa tried to flee the city, determined to survive and find a way to not die from the virus. This was when she stumbled upon none other than Albert Lester, who by this point was just an axe murderer. Bro went crazy after his wife became a zombie. Since Alyssa had lost her memories surrounding Lester and his hospital, she had no idea who he was, and she just blindly followed his guidance since he claimed to know a way out of the city through the mountains. Lester knew who she was, but she didn't know him. Crazy. After Lester led Alyssa to the hospital, she kind of realized that Bro was trying to feed her to a giant fucking plant in the building's basement. This plant, Lester believed, was his wife. She kind of turned into it, mutating over time. Also, a similar plant to this one has this weird cinematic shot in Outbreak where it squirts on the camera. What the fuck? What kink is this? Why is there a plant ussy? What? Freaky Albert Lester and his molester plant wife are defeated by Alyssa, and the hospital completely caves in. Alyssa then escapes and ultimately finds a way out of Raccoon City, even managing to get her hands on a vaccine so she didn't turn into a zombie. Big W for the reporter lady. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. While Alyssa is one important character who suffered in Raccoon City and managed to escape, we'll conclude her story later in the video. Before we get back to Jill and Carlos, there are some other mighty iconic characters who had their own traumatic experiences in Raccoon City. Most of the stuff they did happened while Jill was still sleeping in the hospital, so let's talk about it. Two characters get entangled in the events of the city and have huge impacts in not only Resident Evil 2, but many of the games in the franchise that came after it, one of which being playable in RE9. I bet you can guess who. Leon S. Kennedy had a rough life growing up. His whole family was killed except for Leon because a police officer had managed to save his life. The orphaned Leon then grew up inspired by that police officer. Bro wanted to be just like him when he grew up. When Leon was 21 years old, he was officially a police officer, and he asked to be transferred to the Raccoon City Police Department because he was curious about all the crazy stories coming out of the Arklay Mountains nearby. Also, Leon as a character has one brain cell, and he says things like this.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
With Leon established, we can introduce the woman whose short trip to Raccoon City gets entangled with his own, Claire Redfield. If you recognize the last name, that's because she's the sister of Chris Redfield. She grew up with him, and since he trained in the military, his own fighting skills rubbed off on her. The reason I'm introducing these two is because chronologically, after the previous events of the survivors during these dreaded September nights when everything was going to shit in Raccoon City, Claire and Leon both ran into each other at a gas station. Leon was out driving during the rainy night when he stopped there for gas. Claire was riding into Raccoon City on her motorcycle since she was looking for her brother Chris, not knowing he had gone to Europe the prior month. After noticing the gas station was looking really run down, Leon checked it out and found a cop trying to detain a zombie that proceeded to rip the cop's throat out. After Leon dispatches the thing, Claire shows up right before Leon narrowly saves her from an oncoming zombie. The two of them quickly escape an approaching horde in a cop car and drive into the city looking for answers. Long story short, Leon and Claire get split up, and the game revolves around these two characters navigating the now infected city, taking place in and around September 30th. Leon's story revolves around his arrival to Raccoon City to find out what's going on, and his subsequent interactions and romance with a mercenary named Ada Wong, who poses as an FBI agent. Ada herself comes in repeatedly later in the franchise. On the other hand, Claire's story, of course, revolves around her search for her brother Chris. While Claire and Leon progress through the city, they find and take care of a little girl named Sherry Birkin, who, surprise surprise, is the daughter of William Birkin. Claire and Leon run into said William Birkin, now mutated with the G-Virus of course, and they mag dump him. By the end of their journey, they narrowly escape Raccoon City along with Sherry, a day before October 1st. But what's so important about October 1st? Well, Carlos is about to find out for us. So while Jill is in her coma at the hospital, Carlos searches for Dr. Bard and he finds him, but the guy was shot in the head. Carlos finds a video message where Dr. Bard says Umbrella is evil and he regrets stuff. Luckily, Dr. Bard's computer unlocks a door that reveals a vaccine, which Carlos quickly snatches and injects into Jill. While she slowly heals, Tyrell shows up, and him and Carlos go check out what's on TV.
The contagion spreading throughout the city has been designated uncontainable. On October 1st, Raccoon City will be completely destroyed in a missile strike. All residents capable of rational thought are urged to evacuate immediately. This is not a test.
You know, that is not conducive to life. After Jill wakes up, she finds Tyrell, and Bro tells her that Carlos went underground to find more vaccines. Naturally, Jill goes after him to help out. Along the way, we see Nikolai in the underground, still just fucking stalking her, I guess. Eventually, after Jill journeys into the facility, Tyrell joins her, but he gets killed immediately by the Nemesis because he's the token black guy. Jill makes a vaccine with the available resources she finds, all because the US government said they'd call off the nuke if there was a vaccine present in the city. Unfortunately, after Jill makes the vaccine, she gets ambushed by the Nemesis and Nikolai, who pushes her off a ledge because he wants to see what happens when she fights the Nemesis. Bro has ample data, he's just being an asshole. Carlos shows up and he's all like, yo, let me help you. Jill and Carlos kill the Nemesis again, except they don't, of course, because this thing doesn't fucking die. Jill tries to meet up with Carlos, but is interrupted by, you guessed it, Jill then uses this gigantic, impossibly heavy ray gun. How is she carrying this, by the way? On the wall of flesh acid Nemesis. And now, guys, it's officially dead. I promise. She heads up to the helipad to meet with Carlos, but finds him knocked out. Then this happens.
You're not going to stop. Promised you this, didn't I?
No! Do you have any idea what you've just done?
The missile has launched.
Nikolai pleads with Jill and Carlos to let him go with them on the helicopter since the nuke is 10 minutes away from happening, but Jill's all like, who?
A lot
Cares?
of people. Oh, you! How can I get
Our two heroes fly away as the city is obliterated. GG. Okay, now, real quick, this is just my opinion, but Jill's character writing is dog shit. It's like when they wrote her as a strong woman, but not stronger than a man. She survives a rocket launcher to the ass, but needs a man to save her. She also acts like a hard-ass jerk to everyone, which makes her really unlikable. Now, before any purists burn me at the stake, from what I hear, this is a 3 remake thing since they changed a lot from the original. Jill wasn't always like this, but I digress. While Raccoon City was effectively destroyed, Umbrella Corps would still survive for years to come before its eventual and absolutely deserved collapse. Umbrella's stock plummets after the fall of Raccoon City, but the company, of course, shifts the blame onto something else, the US government. Given they had so many spies in the government, they were able to pull strings and use red herrings to distract everyone. With Raccoon City missiled, Umbrella knew there was little evidence tying them to much of anything. Nonetheless, they would meet the hand of justice within the next few years. Before Umbrella would meet their end, our main cast of characters go on some side adventures. Some of these missions end up being important, so let's talk about them. After escaping from Raccoon City, Claire split off from Leon and the young Sherry Birkin to find Chris in Europe. Leon and Sherry were captured not long after by the US military. Sherry was put in protective custody, considering she was the daughter of such a dangerous man. Leon, on the other hand, was interrogated. The US military knew that Leon was a liability since he knew so much about Umbrella and the government's involvement in the whole disaster. Despite this, the government let Leon live since they could use someone of his insane BOW killing talents in a special anti-Umbrella agency run by the President of the United States himself. Also, BOW is short for bioorganic weapon. Leon is blackmailed into joining this agency to ensure his and Sherry's safety, and the government further trains him in close quarters combat and guns and shit. When it comes to the Redfields, by December 1998, Chris was still on the hunt, investigating Umbrella for their evil shit in Europe, and Claire was still searching for him, since she didn't find him in Raccoon City. But speaking of Claire, let's talk about her events, which transpire in one of the most important RE games, Code Veronica. Now this takes us all the way back to Chapter 1. Remember how Spencer had one of his old colleagues, Edward Ashford, basically axed? Well, Edward's son, Alexander Ashford, moved back to the Ashford-operated Rockford Island. Alexander continued to do independent research, though, utilizing a facility him and his father had previously worked out of in Antarctica. Alexander developed a new strain of the progenitor virus called the Veronica virus. And if you're wondering about the name, Veronica was in reference to one of his ancestors in the Ashford family. With the T. Veronica virus, Alexander sought to make a T virus variant that didn't mess with the subject's cognition after they were infected. What's really messed up about the T. Veronica virus is that Alexander involved his 2 kids in his research, Alexia and Alfred. A lot of A names. But see, this backfired on him. His kids were freaky. and actually decided to test this Veronica virus on him, their dad, in 1982. Bro turned into a monster since the version they infected him with wasn't really ready, and Alexia then tested it on herself, but with the caveat that she'd cryogenically freeze herself for 15 years after she did so. I guess she figured by being frozen for 15 years, she'd somehow bypass the same fate of her dad. Spoiler alert, that didn't really do shit. Now, fast forward back to December of 1998. By now, the only currently living Alfred, son of Alexander and brother of Alexia, was just a mere supervisor on the Rockford prison island. The guy had gone pretty insane with everything that happened with his dad and sister, and he was about to go fully off the deep end due to some visitors who were about to show up. Albert Wesker attacked the island, causing an outbreak of the T-virus. He did this because he had learned about Alexia and wanted to see if she was a success. He wanted the T-Veronica virus. He was also just generally curious. The other new visitor to the island was Claire Redfield. See, while investigating a European Umbrella facility in Paris, she got captured by Umbrella and dumped on Rockford Island. As the island is under attack by Wesker's paramilitary group, the HCF, which stands for Huge Cock Foundation, by the way, many of the island's prisoners end up escaping, including Claire and this guy named Steve Burnside. Claire manages to send an email to Leon asking for help because, holy fuck, she was getting hunted down by the maniacal prison warden Alfred Ashford while everything was going to shit on this random-ass island. Leon sees this email and he gets in contact with Chris, proceeding to send him to the island to go find Claire, a bit of an Uno reverse card for these siblings. But when Chris gets there, Claire's gone. See, Claire and Steve ended up getting on a cargo plane that autopiloted them to the Ashford's Antarctic base. Once they got there and they entered this facility, Steve was infected with the Veronica virus, turning into this. Chris tracks them down and arrives to save the day. Steve dies though, R.I.P. Chris and Claire come face to face with Alexia, who had just stepped out of the cryo fridge since her 15 years were up, and they have a tussle. Alexia fucking dies, a self-destruct sequence gets initiated, of course, and Wesker shows up. Wesker and Chris have a little homoerotic showdown, and then Wesker gets a million metal beams dropped on him, but he survives. Barely an inconvenience. Chris and Claire then escape the facility before it gets destructed, but strangely, Wesker survives the self-destruct and ends up actually getting a sample of the Veronica virus he wanted anyway from Steve's corpse. How did he achieve this when the facility nuked itself, like right after Wesker got out from under the metal beams? Yeah, the game didn't answer that, so neither will I. The consequence of Wesker getting the Veronica virus from Steve's body was going to have ripple effects. This is due to Wesker selling the Veronica virus on the black market, which eventually finds its way into the hands of a South American warlord named Javier Hidalgo in 2001. After reports that the drug cartel leader had access to bioweapons, the President of the United States sent a two-man army to go deal with this situation. That two-man army consisted of none other than our boy Leon Kennedy and a hard-ass soldier named Jack Krauser. Long story short, these two find Javier Hidalgo's daughter, Manuela. This daughter, like her mom, had a degenerative illness, and Javier thought she was gonna die. Bro was gonna do anything he could to save her. So he infected her with the Veronica virus, thinking this would help, and to keep her from turning into a monster beyond recognition, he had been constantly doing organ transplants on her. But where did he get the organs he was replacing hers with? Oh, none other than countless random women he kidnapped. Leon and Krauser find this guy. He lets himself get devoured by a giant zombie plant so that he can become a big old meat monster, and Leon and Krauser have a final showdown with the guy. Manuela helps finish him off with some kind of fire ability, but she's not looking too good. As the three evac by helicopter, she straight up glows out of existence. I'm sorry, what? In retrospect, Leon and Krauser's South American adventure isn't all that important right now, but it's gonna come into play later, trust. Plus, it's Leon's lore, and Leon is important in 9, so I thought it needed to be mentioned, especially as it shows the consequences of Code Veronica. But with all this injustice, you're probably feeling like we need an actual successful mission by now. At least I do, and that's why we're finally going to get to talk about the fall of Umbrella. It's 2003, 5 years since Umbrella's actions led to Raccoon City getting deleted from the map. Unfazed by how fucking despicable they were, they had a rather important base of operations all the way in Russia. Here, they were working on a new BOW, codenamed Talos. They planned to sell this new weapon off to poverty-stricken nations, because they thought it would be fun, I guess. But their plans were about to be foiled. A biohazard containment unit was on their way to the Russian facility on rumors that Umbrella was making some crazy shit there. This unit had none other than our two baddies, Chris and Jill, and they were hungry for revenge. Heading down into an elevator, taking them deep within the facility, Chris and Jill proceed to a weird circular room where this Russian dude named Sergei Vladimir, classic Russian, basically tells them over the speakers that they have to fight the Talos BOW. According to Sergei, it's controlled by Umbrella's Red Queen AI that he had yoinked from Spencer's facilities before the place got self-destructed many years ago. Needless to say, Jill and Chris destroy Talos pretty easily. From the control room, Wesker, who had orchestrated the biocontainment unit actually finding this Umbrella base in the first place, confronts Sergei. And the conversation pretty much goes along the lines of this. My AI girlfriend over there is real, I'm telling you. She and I have a lot in common. That thing only tells you what you want to hear. Also, wow, you need to get some bitches on your team.
We are not done!
Kind of hungry. Wesker yoinks a copy of the Umbrella data for himself before promptly deleting their entire cloud network, and just like that, Umbrella is dissolved. All at the hands of Albert Wesker, no less. Bro was just playing 4D chess. While many of the events we just covered are explained in the two Nintendo Wii side games, the Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles and the Darkside Chronicles, it's at this point that the story takes us back to the mainline games. And not just any. Chronologically, the next game to cover is the fan favorite Resident Evil 4, which thrusts Leon Kennedy into one of his most dangerous missions yet. Allow me to set the stage. It's 2004, and guess what? The president's daughter, Ashley Graham, has been kidnapped by a cult-like gang known as Los Illuminados, located somewhere in Spain. Leon heads to the area to find and rescue her, as directed by the president's agency that he works for. These two cops drive Leon to the area, but they stop, and one gets out to go for a piss. He doesn't return. Leon goes looking for him, and he finds him, but, well, he's fucking dead. Leon's ambushed by some kind of zombie villager guy that you can assume killed the police officer, and from there, Leon progresses into the remote village where he finds the other officer being burned at the stake. Yum. Leon alerts the horde of insane villagers, but before he gets absolutely skull-fucked, a bell rings out, and they kind of just get lobotomized. The zombies stop attacking Leon and instead head towards the source of the bell, a nearby church. Ada did this, by the way, because she wants to fuck Leon. Later, Leon finds a man tied up in a basement when he's suddenly attacked by this huge village chief who quickly overpowers Leon and injects him with some kind of bug virus. It's at this point that I need to explain this whole bug virus thing and where it originated from, because it's super important in RE4 and 5. I'll make this brief, because again, I'm not trying to waste your time here. Back many centuries prior to 2004, this region of Spain faced a horrifying conflict. Some people ended up getting infected by this bug parasite species called the Las Plagas. When a person gets infected with a plaga, they become what's known as a ganado, which basically means livestock. It was also at this time that there was an emerging governing family called the Salazars, who'd risen to power. After crusading against any infected ganado people in the region, the Salazars banished the ganado into a cave system. The Salazars then built a castle on top of these caves to keep the plagas sealed forever. But the subsequent peace did not last. Many years later, a descendant of the Ganados who were sealed in the caves, Osmond Sadler, found out what happened to his ancestors. He discovered the plagas and decided to make a cult called Los Illuminados, which means the Enlightened Ones. From here, Sadler cozied up to Ramon Salazar, the then descendant governor of the castle, who also just so happened to be a really sick and twisted individual. But since we're all caught up with the whole Las Plagas parasite, let's continue with Leon. Leon wakes up chained to the man he found earlier, who introduces himself as Luis. Luis gives some hints as to the potential location of the president's daughter before they both get free and he runs off. According to Leon's agent, Luis was a previous Umbrella employee. At last, Leon finds the president's daughter Ashley in a church and tries to calm her down so they can team up. Once she's reasonably chill enough, they attempt to escape the area for evac. They find Luis, and he tells them that they're both infected and they're gonna need a vaccine. Luis then parts ways with the pair for a bit, sneaking off to have a little chat with, surprise, surprise, Ada Wong. She's mixed up in this because she needs Luis's help to find an important item, what they call the Amber. As long as Luis can help her find it, Ada and her associates would help him escape the area as part of a deal. Leon and Ashley find out from Leon's agent that the chopper can't get them due to the weather, so the pair go to the Salazar castle to meet up with Luis for some virus suppressants that can delay the effects of the plagas inside them. Once inside the castle, Leon and Ashley meet Mr. Ramon Salazar. This little shit is basically just helping Sadler fulfill his plan to infect the president's daughter with the plagas, have her taken back to the US, and then Bluetooth control her via his own Queen Plagas, which lets him basically control anyone infected with the subordinate Plagas. Doing this, he could infiltrate US intelligence and eventually take over the world. Bada boom, bada bang, Leon and Ashley fend off some enemies, but eventually she gets temporarily mind-controlled and threatens to stab herself. Ashley comes to and freaks the fuck out. Reasonably so. Leon and Ada run into each other. God, they're both so fucking hot. After Leon finds Ashley again, she's all like, I don't want to be near you because I might hurt you. And Leon's all like, Ashley, it's okay. You're like 9. Fast forward, Ashley inevitably gets grabbed and taken away again, and after her and Leon get split up, Leon and Luis run into each other, and they go to save Ashley. Along the way, they go on these fun minecart adventures, but then someone shows up who you definitely wouldn't have seen coming. Jack Krauser. Yeah, that guy from earlier. Turns out he works for Wesker's secret organization now, and is the one who kidnapped Ashley in the first place. He's also the one holding her hostage currently. Bro kills Luis, big L, and Leon chases after Krauser and Ashley on a rescue and revenge mission. Ramon Salazar tries to stop Leon, but bro is having fucking none of it. You slaughter the 3-foot meat-morphing fuck and chase after Krauser and Ashley to an island off the coast, which Ada shows up to help you with. On this island, you find some abominations, naturally having been created by Umbrella, such as this thing. I was the real fool. That's nice. You save Ashley, but then she gets unsaved because Sadler's a cunt, and Leon and Krauser have a little showdown. You know, for the longest time, before I knew anything about Resident Evil, I always thought that Krauser's form here was one of Wesker's forms. If you played 5, you could probably imagine why. Anyway, Leon kills Krauser, saves Ashley with the help of Ada, and the two of them burst into Luis's Umbrella lab thanks to the key he gave you before he died. Then they use his super sophisticated anti-Plagas torture device to rid themselves of their parasites. Ada is unfortunately captured by Sadler before she can make it to the lab. Leon naturally rescues Ada, and the two of them team up to bring Sadler down. Ada escapes on her helicopter with the Amber. She promptly yoinks from Leon, but oh, then we get another self-destruct sequence. Leon and Ashley sailed away on a jet ski as the island is about to self-destruct, and it's honestly really sweet. Ada then radios her employer and asks him what he's gonna do with the Amber, and it's revealed that her employer is Albert frickin' Wesker. He explains that billions are going to die for the betterment of a few, and Ada, having heard that, points her gun at the pilot and orders him to change course. I don't think she's down for Wesker's whole destroying most of humanity thing. Mainly because how would she survive and make her back? RE4 is a fan favorite, mainly because the original was super campy and ridiculous compared to the more muted and mature remake. And while RE4 is one of the most well-known RE games, where the story takes us next is to a game that's quite the opposite, a side game in the franchise which helps us understand the sheer extent to which bioweapons would be used on a global scale. Enter Revelations. Around the early 2000s, a group of researchers were paid to develop a bioweapon using a virus codenamed Malakota found in certain local deep-sea fish in the Kermadec Trench. Samples of the virus were collected and combined with the existing T-virus to create a marine virus of unspeakable destructive potential. It could destroy the world's oceanic ecosystem. But moving away from top-secret shit to stuff in the public eye, around this time we focus on a new city, an 11-year-long project to build the world's first fully solar-powered city off the Mediterranean coast. The city was concluded and named Terra Grigia, though it might as well have just been named Fruitiger Arrow the City. In 2004, it was targeted by a terrorist organization called Veltro, and the city was overrun by BOWs, despite the efforts of an anti-bioterrorism organization called the Federal Bioterrorism Commission, or FBC. Unbeknownst to the public, the FBC secretly orchestrated the entire attack on Terra Grigia to use as a controlled experiment where they would test the recently created bioweapon, which we now call the T-Abyss virus, the same one codenamed Malakota that I just mentioned. The FBC, being a piece of shit organization, is important because in the game itself, you play as members of a different organization called the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, or BSAA. You are sent to investigate the FBC because they're really sus. You play as returning characters like Jill and Chris, and the new characters introduced in Revelations like Parker Luciani and Keith Lumley. The events of the game are convoluted as hell because it constantly switches characters and geographic locations, so allow me to save you the trouble by giving you the TLDR. Pair A, Jill and Parker, are sent to investigate a cruise ship suspected of belonging to Veltro. Pair B, Chris and this woman named Jessica, are sent to some snowy mountains in Europe to investigate an airstrip suspected of being taken over by Veltro. Pair A got false information that Pair B was on the ship, which is called the Queen Zenobia, by the way. And Pair A then gets captured by a mysterious soldier while aboard the ship. Pair B finds out and goes to save them, while Pair C, dipshits Keith and Quint, go to the mountains to get more info. Pair B gets to the ship, but finds out they're actually on a decoy, a second ship that's basically the same thing as the first ship, this one being called the Queen Semiramis. All the while, it's revealed the leader of the FBC, the secretly evil organization, is this guy named Morgan Lansdale. But funny enough, Lansdale wasn't even the one orchestrating this confusing plot, because actually it's your own leader at the BSAA who is dragging these different teams around to different places to confuse his own teams and himself, all so that he can actually confuse his true enemy, Lansdale. After all, to confuse your enemy, you must first confuse yourself. Also, there was allegedly a mole in the team, so he was trying to root that out as well. The game ends when Jill and Chris dive to a third ship, which is sunk deep in the ocean. Yes, there was a third Queen ship, this one being called Queen Dido. They get a secret hard drive in it with enough shit incriminating Lansdale to ruin Bro's entire existence. The hard drive contains the video evidence of Lansdale hiring Veltro to disperse the virus into Terra Grigia in the first place. So Bro gets locked up, the BSAA basically becomes the new FBC and absorbs a lot of its resources, and all the good guys live happily ever after, mostly. Also, this Ronald McDonald looking man is named Raymond. He's a very strange face. I just thought I'd share that fact. Continuing on with the story, we move right into the first CGI movie, Degeneration. Later in the year, after the events of Revelations, still 2005, we're in an airport, catching up with Claire. After everything she went through in Code Veronica, she joined an organization called TerraSave, which has possibly the worst motto you could fathom for a human rights group.
Because tear doesn't have to end with a wrist.
Tear doesn't have to end with wrist? What the fuck?
After Umbrella was dissolved, a new pharmaceutical company called Will Pharma emerged and basically just took their place. One of Will Pharma's scientists, who was an ex-Umbrella employee, Frederick Downing, was trying to sell viruses on the black market to foreign countries, and this was gonna have major consequences. Anyway, Claire is just chilling in this airport when zombies suddenly come out of nowhere and a huge plane crashes into the building. The airport is quarantined and Leon shows up to rescue this fuck-ass Senator Ron Davis, who's one of the few remaining survivors alongside Claire. Leon and the gang save the airport survivors, and Claire and Leon team up to investigate Will Pharma at one of their facilities. This guy named Curtis Miller, who doesn't work for Will Pharma, is trying to destroy the company because he wants to show the world how evil they are. He's actually mad-based and hates corruption, and is just trying to reveal the government's cover-up of Will Pharma's bioterrorism. However, his plans are foiled because Will Pharma uses Curtis as a scapegoat for the zombie plane incident. In an act of desperation to get his message out, he ends up injecting himself with the G virus, thinking the world would be like, yo, Will Pharma's evil. But Claire and Leon just kill him, so no revolution, I guess. Then the facility explodes, so original. This is original. Finally, Leon, Claire, and Curtis Miller's sister, who was also in this movie, help to apprehend Frederick Downing for his evilness, and guess what? The cycle repeats. Another big bad organization called Tricell comes in and buys out Will Pharma, cleaning up the failed company's mess for Tricell's own future plans. Speaking of Tricell's future plans, that takes us right up to RE5. Do you remember the BSAA? Well, they're quick to act following the events of Revelations, and they send out operatives all over the world to places suspected of creating bioweapons. In 2006, the year after Leon and Claire's fun little Will Pharma incident, Chris and Jill are tasked to head into our old friend Spencer E. Oswell's new, and namely not blown up, estate. But it turns out Albert Wesker got there before them and actually killed the now old and decrepit Spencer, because why not? Jill tackles Wesker out a window, and they're both presumed dead. 3 years later, in 2009, Chris is sent to the West African city of Kijuju. There have been reports or rumors of a virus in this region. He meets a fellow operative, Sheva Alomar there, a fellow BSAA member who's familiar with the area. Chris is feeling emotional about not having Jill as his partner, but Chris and Sheva get acquainted and start making progress. While searching the town, their butcher informant tells them to look for a man named Irving, who has info on a possible bioweapon called Ouroboros. The butcher helps the pair gear up and sends them on their way. This Ouroboros virus is different in how it affects zombie victims. The Ouroboros zombies are smarter, able to hold weapons, and they can force non-infected to eat their multivirus gummies or whatever the fuck this thing Wait a second, that looks like the Las Plagas from RE4. Chris and Sheva continue on their way. Their butcher informant perishes, RIP, and the pair is aided by occasional aerial backup as they continue on their mission. The duo finds many dead BSA soldiers on their way as they slaughter the infected locals. Trapped in a motor vehicle ambush, it's not looking good for Chris and Sheva until the BSA Delta team saves their asses. The captain of said Delta team is Josh Stone, who actually trained Sheva when she first started in the BSAA. The Delta team split off from the duo in search of information on Ouroboros, and Chris and Sheva proceed on to where Irving is suspected to be hiding. Once they get to him, he's unfortunately saved by a hooded crow lady. Some documents Chris finds reveal Irving is headed for an oil field in the marshlands. With the new information, the two attempt to meet back up with Delta Team, but find out that the squad has been wiped out by some huge troll zombie. Chris and Sheva then kill it before boating through the marshlands. The two stumble upon the tribal Nidipaya people we talked about way back in Chapter 1, and they don't look so good.
How could someone do this to them?
Whoa, wait. Look, it's the Trilobi mask.
Wow, that's so cool.
No, you destroyed it. No.
Oh, oops.
I'm getting back in the fucking boat. In one of the tribal people's notes, we learn that they were given a virus from a man who came from the oil field, presumably Irving. The results were devastating, as the virus quickly infected basically all of them. Turns out the children all died from the virus, the men became mega angry, and the women became disoriented and idle. Right before Chris and Sheva reach the oil fields, they find an abandoned Tricell camp. Tricell is a company that provides funding for the BSAA, but behind the scenes, they were clearly one of the interested parties in the Las Plagas virus. They were doing experiments with it, creating multiple different types of the virus. Type 2 Las Plagas was able to turn hosts quicker than Type 1. Type 3 was a variant that made hosts stronger, and in some cases bigger. Type 3 was more marketable as they wanted to sell super soldiers, but its main issue was that it didn't always transform its host. For men, it had a 92% attachment rate, and for women and children, it was 0. Anyway, Chris and Sheva reach the oil plant, of course owned and operated by Tricell no less. Here, Irving escapes from them yet again. Josh appears because somehow he's still alive, even though his team was killed, and through teamwork, you're able to catch up to Irving, who's on his big old boat. Irving, in fear and desperation, decides to inject himself with some kind of Type 3 or 4 Plagas, and he's all like... Before Chris and Sheva execute Fish Irving, he tells them to go to a cave to find some answers. I guess he had a change of heart. Josh drops Chris and Sheva off at the cave, and it's revealed that Albert Wesker has been pulling the strings with Tricell, and he has a girlfriend named Excella, who's in a position of power at Tricell. Also, the Crow Lady reports to Wesker, and you know what? There is something familiar about her. At this point, the Ouroboros virus is basically complete, so Wesker is about to do some irreversible humanity-destroying shit. The duo find a facility used by both Tricell and Umbrella Corps, and find a huge room used to store human subjects in pods, with people taken from all over the world. Chris checks to see if Jill is in a pod, but hers is empty. The two continue to chase after Wesker and Excella and find out that the hooded woman was none other than Jill herself. Everyone saw this coming, by the way. Wesker play fights with Chris and Sheva before getting bored. Wesker and Excella leave after forcing Wesker's remote-controlled Jill to fight Chris and Sheva in his stead. Chris and Sheva rip the bug off Jill's chest, and Jill encourages the two to stop Wesker. Jill needs time to recover from her 3-year mind and body control, while the duo needs to save the world. So Chris and Sheva ditch Jill and board Wesker's big-ass cargo ship. Wesker then betrays and injects Excella, turning her into this big meat monster to slow Chris and Sheva down. The two of them kill her, and before facing Wesker, we learn an important piece of information. Since Wesker was initially injected with his progenitor virus, he has needed regular scheduled injections of limited funny virus liquid stuff in order to remain powerful but not out of control. Right before Chris and Sheva face him, Jill explains that by dosing Wesker with extra juice, they could make him unstable and he could actually be killed. Chris and Sheva inject him with the goof juice, and Wesker crashes out, hopping on a big old cargo plane to try and escape the determined BSAA agents. Chris and Sheva hop on too, at which point Wesker delivers some bad news.
I have Ouroboros. In less than 5 minutes, we'll reach the optimal altitude for missile deployment. Ouroboros will be released into the atmosphere, ensuring complete global saturation.
So anyway, the plane crashes in a volcano, everyone miraculously survives, and Chris has a realistic demonstration of strength. What? Wesker falls in the lava, and Jill and Josh show up in a helicopter to save Chris and Sheva before the two of them shoot 2 well-placed rockets directly at Wesker's face, permanently ending Albert Wesker and stopping the world from being destroyed. For now. What the group doesn't know, however, is that they haven't finished off all of the Weskers. There's still another one that someone's gonna have to deal with, which we learn all about in the next game, Resident Evil Revelations 2. Revelations 2 is primarily set on Sign Island, which was formerly under the USSR, so the residents, who aren't necessarily evil, are mostly of Russian descent. The island had a tapped-out coal mine, disheveled prison, communications tower, and a town that was struggling to make ends meet. That was until Alex Wesker entered the picture in the 1970s. Alex Wesker is the pseudo-sister to Albert Wesker, meaning they're not blood-related, but were both adopted into the Wesker project. She was super into eugenics, and she was an Umbrella employee prior to the company's downfall. Alex was trying to find the perfect spot to set up a research facility for her own interests separate from Umbrella's, but using Umbrella funding. This was when she discovered the Sign Island and its people. She hired the natives to help aid in construction of her new laboratory, and in 1998, the Wesker candidates were injected with the prototype virus. While Albert was a success story, Alex was not. She developed an incurable illness from the virus and did not obtain superpowers like Albert. Before Umbrella's downfall, Alex was ordered to research stuff to make Spencer immortal, but she refused because she was getting really sick from her illness. So instead of doing what Spencer wanted her to do, which was to work on this other island, she put someone else in charge and dipped to her own Sign Island. This is when she went all in on the island with the intention of researching a strain of the T-virus, the T-Phobos virus. After Umbrella's downfall, Alex invested heavily into the natives, giving them more jobs. Many of them started to view her as a savior or god because of their growing economic island success. In 2008, under the guise of employment, she tricked the inhabitants into her facilities to test the T-Phobos virus on them. Over time, the number of villagers dwindled as infection and zombiness became rampant on the island. By 2010, an updated virus was in place that reduced the chance of killing the host and reduced the chance of immunity, but test subjects were failing. See, this virus and the mutations that occur are activated by the biological fear response in the body. So when people got too scared, they would become mutants instead of being superhuman hosts. Alex needed more candidates for her research and was running out of time and options until she met Neil Fisher. Neil was the leader of TerraSave, but he secretly aligned with the beliefs of the now imprisoned Morgan Lansdale, who believed radical action had to happen to ensure the world's stability in the face of bioterrorism. Alex and Neil came to an agreement. He would supply her with test subjects from his own company in exchange for a sample of the Ouroboros virus. He wanted to use the sample to make a vaccine to make the Ouroboros virus useless on the black market. With all that said, Neil Fisher hosted a party with TerraSave to assemble his part of the deal for Alex. Among the many guests of the TerraSave party were two protagonists of Revelation 2, Claire and her friend Moira Burton. The power was cut during the party and the attendees were drugged and kidnapped. Claire and Moira awaken on Sign Island, disoriented and in prison cells, wearing rusty little bracelets. The two leave their cells and embark on a mission for their escape, all while being taunted by Alex Wesker, who's watching their every move. They face many abominations as they make their way to a radio tower. It's here that Moira sends out a distress signal calling for help. Fortunately or not, Claire and Moira aren't the only ones from TerraSave on the island. The two women find Gabe and Pedro, and they all team up to work towards their escape. Gabe attempts to fix a helicopter until the group is ambushed by infected, killing Pedro in the process and rendering Gabe missing. Claire and Moira are facing death when Neil appears and saves them. Claire and Moira didn't know he's a traitor though, so they're just relieved. The two get split up from Neil as they progress through the island, and then they find Natalia, this scared little girl. She's all alone, and she's wearing the same bracelet as them, only Natalia's is solid red. Moira is able to calmly convince Natalia to stay with them, but this doesn't last long because Gabe arrives in the helicopter he managed to get working. Alex Wesker blasts the helicopter, making Gabe panic, which activates his mutation, ending in him crashing the helicopter in a nearby building. Unbeknownst to the women, Neil shows up and grabs Natalia during the helicopter distraction. Moira and Claire realize Natalia is missing, but they think they'll find her if they continue their search on the island for Alex Wesker, which at this point is their only hope of escaping. As they search this big-ass building, they discover Neil was a rat who basically used them as sacrifices. Alex then betrays Neil because why the fuck not? She doesn't have to uphold her side of the trade now, and she injects him with the Ouroboros sample. This makes him a big ol' monster, and he attacks Moira and Claire. It is at this point that a decision has to be made that dictates which ending of the game you get. See, Claire is pinned down by the Neil monster, and her gun lays on the ground just out of reach. Moira lays opposite Claire, with the gun just out of reach of her as well. In this final battle with the monster, you choose who uses the gun. Something to know about Moira is that in her childhood, she and her sister were playing with their father's gun when Moira accidentally shot her sister. Her sister survived the incident, but Moira's relationship with her father and guns did not. Moira this entire game has adamantly refused to touch or use guns, sticking to flashlights and her trusty crowbar. If Claire uses the gun, the Neil monster dies and we cut to Alex watching over them. She remarks that she has what she needs, and we pan to Natalia, who's hooked up to some machinery. The two women continue up the building and get face to face with Alex. She lore dumps everything that you now know, and then blasts her fucking brains out after setting the building up for self-destruction. Moira and Claire have to escape the crumbling building, but in the process, Moira gets trapped under falling rubble and isn't able to get out. Claire has to abandon Moira, and she dumps out of the building into the sea. Now, back to the decision, right? If Moira uses the gun, she actually faces her fear. The same events occur, but trust that the difference between these two decisions will become clear later. Some time passes from the initial kidnapping, and we see Claire in a hospital being rushed down the hall. A man, Barry Burton, is with her, demanding to know where his daughter is, Moira. If you haven't connected the dots yet, Barry Burton is the same guy from Resident Evil 1. Crazy. Claire's all like, she's gone. But Barry isn't having any of it. The guy spends the next 6 months acquiring supplies and information until finally he parks his boat at Sign Island. He was able to find the island through that radio signal message that Moira had sent right after they had escaped the prison initially. Shortly after his arrival, he meets Natalia, and the two embark on a journey following Moira's footsteps. Natalia is low-key lobotomized and doesn't remember Moira and Claire until they get to the radio tower and she hears Moira's broadcast. She panics and tells Barry that Moira is dead, but the father says no and keeps looking for his baby gal. Onwards they go, defeating Mutant Gabe and other creatures. They enter the now crumbled big building, and inside the building they find Mutant Alex, who says some creepy shit about how everyone's dead and buried except for one. A flock of monsters surround Barry and Natalia, but they manage to escape Alex and her goons. Barry and Natalia continue to traverse the island, now attempting to escape Alex and goons, while still maybe in search of Moira's remains. They eventually make their way into an underground laboratory where they face Alex yet again, and when you think you might kill her and the end is in sight, Mutant Alex grabs hold of Natalia. Natalia was chosen by Alex long ago to be the body and new host for Alex's mind. Experiments have been underway to upload Alex's memories into the little girl. It helps also that Natalia's body is free from the illness and mutations that Alex's body has experienced over so many years. Also, Natalia's mind was strong enough to be the new host for Alex. However, at this point, Alex is so twisted with her mutated brain that she hates Natalia and thinks that she's not the true Alex and is a fake. So Mutant Alex wants Natalia dead. This is where the decision from earlier comes into play. If Claire used the gun to kill Neil, then your ending is this. Natalia is crushed by Mutant Alex, and she appears to be dead, until Natalia wakes up with red mutant eyes. Natalia breaks Alex's arm off and rips her heart out from her chest. Mutant Alex is dead, and Barry's all like, Natalia? The girl laughs, tells him to call her Alex, and Barry threatens to kill Natalia, but is incapable. She then just walks off, laughing to herself. In case it wasn't obvious, that is the bad ending. Luckily, there's another ending. If Moira was the one to gun down Neil, then your ending is this. Natalia is being crushed, but suddenly, Mutant Alex is shot ruthlessly until Natalia is free from her clutches. Natalia and Barry are stunned and look to see Moira. She's alive and brave enough to wield a gun now. She's also rocking a red bracelet, so it's safe to say that she's mutated and is superhuman in some capacity. The three run from Mutant Alex as the bullets only stunned her temporarily. The group then run outside to the cliff's edge when a helicopter appears with a sniper-wielding Claire. Natalia and Moira climb in the chopper while Barry fights on the ground with Mutant Alex. The battle ends with Claire shooting a rocket into the monster's face. A fitting end for a Wesker. The gang leaves the island and Barry adopts Natalia into the Burton family. There is one final cutscene that shows Natalia talking to herself that kind of, implies that Natalia has split personalities, and Alex is somewhere in there. Will the consequences of this ever show up later in the franchise? Who knows? But playing through Revelations 2 was some of the most fun I've had playing a Resident Evil game. I think the writers and game developers really hit their stride with this one, but when you look back at some of their other content, namely what comes next in chronological order in the whole Resident Evil story, it's quite a lot more sloppy, to put it lightly.
I will take over your research.
In my honest opinion, the later Resident Evil movies, as well as RE6, which all came out around 2012, give or take a few years, had a distinct level of tackiness to their stories. As the writers were trying to figure out how to make things bigger and better, they failed to ask the question of whether any of their ideas to do so were going to be genuinely interesting developments for the franchise. I'm going to give you a brief idea of Damnation, RE6, Vendetta, and the surprisingly recently released Death Island, which were all so focused on patting themselves on the back for their established characters that they just got a bit lost in the sauce with the repetitious stuff they continued to put them through. a lot of which being pretty divorced from the original plot involving Miranda, Spencer, Umbrella, and so on. In contrast, the recent Resident Evil 9 Requiem does an amazing job at storytelling that it makes these more questionable areas of the franchise really stand out. With that said, I'm going to move through these in as straightforward a way as I can to keep you from bleeding out of every orifice by the sheer density of information. Damnation is a movie set in a fictional Slavic nation, mostly centering around Leon in the year 2011. We get some lore exposition about the collapse of the Soviet Union and a fictional country called the Eastern Slav Republic declaring their independence. Unfortunately, oligarchs came to power and there was a massive divide between the wealthy and poor, which resulted in a brutal civil war. Eventually, the first ever female president of the ESR granted a ceasefire between the two. That was until she found out that there was some oil beneath the rebel-held land. This reignited the conflict in the name of fighting terrorism. In February of 2011, there were rumors that monsters had joined the fight, so Leon was dispatched to investigate if BOWs were being used in the conflict. Throughout the film, Leon tries to stop both sides from fighting, but sides with the rebels. The rebels utilize the Las Plagas virus, which gets basically all of them killed by the end except for this one guy named Buddy. The ESR, on the other hand, uses tyrants, leading to this scene.
Come on, don't be shy.
The movie ends when Leon helps the US and Russia calm the civil war and the evil ESR president lady resigns. GG. A year later, in 2012, this is when RE6 begins, and holy mother of God is this story complex. The game follows 4 campaigns explaining the events that happen over the course of 6 months from December 2012 to the summer of 2013. You play as Chris, Leon, and Ada, as well as a new character to the franchise, Jake Muller, who was later revealed to be Albert Wesker's son. Also, characters like Sherry Birkin make a return, all grown up. Overall, the characters in this game go through endless misery while they try to stop this group called Neo Umbrella. Leon has to kill the zombified president of the United States. Ada has to navigate the fact that a clone of her was running around doing evil shit. Jake has to come to terms with the fact that he's Wesker's son. And Chris has to make no fucking sense as a character. I say this because he becomes absolutely enraged for most of the game after clone Ada kills his squad mates, but then after Leon gives him a pep talk, he completely 180s and is suddenly no longer mad. Probably he was able to calm down just at the thought of Leon fucking his sister. All in all, the bad guys die, and the only real consequence of 6 is that it leads into Vendetta, the next CGI movie. In 2014, former CIA operative dude Glenn Arias decides to become a weapons dealer. Also, he looks like Jeffrey Epstein. He does some evil shit. Rebecca and Chris want Leon to help them stop Epstein. Glenn, so they go find Leon in a bar. But bro is so done with everything.
I'm sorry to interrupt your vacation, but we really need to talk. Do you really need to fuck Chris's sister, Claire?
I really need you to fuck my sister.
Eventually, Leon agrees to help them. Glenn launches a bioweapon attack on the city he's residing in, but the trio kill Glenn and release the vaccine into the city, and all the infected are saved in the end. The only issue with the ending is that Arias' bodyguard's daughter, named Maria, is still alive, and she wants revenge real bad since Chris and Leon helped kill her father. This leads us into the last CGI movie, known as Death Island. It takes place in 2015, mostly in San Francisco and the nearby Alcatraz Island. All you really need to know is that it's the first movie where Chris, Jill, Claire, Rebecca, and Leon all hang out in real time, though it's unsurprisingly under the circumstances of having to defeat a supervillain named Dylan Blake. Basically, bro wanted to have the ability to pick and choose who he infected and turned into zombies. He did this utilizing these tiny mosquito drones that could infect people with ease. He mostly just wanted to infect the big bad governments, which is honestly kind of based, but then his villain monologue just starts to make no sense, and he likes to hit this cane on the ground because it reminds him of this time when he had to bash his friend's brains in Raccoon City because there were zombies and his friend was going to turn into a zombie. And yeah, anyway, so he feeds himself to a zombie shark. This way he's able to become the zombie shark, kind of, and yeah, I'm about as lost as you are. Our heroes kill the zombie shark and they all come out unscathed. Except for Leon. The guy was fighting Maria and got his head smashed into a metal railing so hard that it bent the metal. In response to this, Leon punched her across the room, impaling her on a metal spike. I think at this point we have to acknowledge that Leon is not a human. At last, we can finally get into the really interesting lore. We're so close to RE9, I can taste it. Okay, so do you remember Alyssa Ashcroft, the reporter we talked about at the start of the video? Well, for decades after the Raccoon City incident, the determined journalist would try to alert the world to what Umbrella and other corrupt corporations had done, with little effectiveness since there were so many cover-ups. While she continued her reporting career, Alyssa also raised a daughter named Grace, who Surprise, surprise, we play as in the latest game. Tragically, in 2018, Alyssa was investigating a place called Wrenwood Hotel, where she was murdered in front of Grace while trying to find answers on a secret US government project called Elpis. The murder of Alyssa directly influenced her daughter Grace to pursue a career as an FBI technical analyst. The biggest question for RE9 is, does she succeed? Before we get to 9 though, we do have to talk about the 2 games which up until the release of 9 had been the latest in the franchise, most notorious for having switched up the formula for better and for worse. Kinda depends how you see it. But however you feel about the 2 games, they ushered in a new era for Resident Evil. So without further ado, let's explore Resident Evil 7 and 8 through the story of a man named Ethan Winters. RE7 introduces us to a new organization that has actually been in the shadows doing shit for a long time, likely as far back as the 1950s. This group is called the Connections. See, a while back, after our boy Oswell E. Spencer moved on from working with Miranda, the Connections found the woman. In exchange for samples of her mold thing, they'd help her research it and speed up progress towards basically doing what she wanted to do, to make a host for her daughter, Eva. In their research, the Connections made different types of viruses stemming from the mold, with their own goal being to make a host that could mind control those it infected. Clearly not very original, because bro, I swear this is the idea of so many viruses in this franchise. Anyway, they make the D-type virus, but after 8 failed experiments utilizing little lab-grown girls who died either on their own or just by being terminated by the company, eventually they moved on to the E-type, and they grew this girl they named Evelyn. Evelyn would come to be fond of one of the researchers, a woman named Mia Winters. In October of 2014, Evelyn and the Connections researchers are on a boat called the Annabelle. The boat was caught in a bad hurricane, and Evelyn takes over the boat, spreading the mold throughout. She also kills everyone except for Mia, because Mia fulfilled the role of a mother. Evelyn liked having a mother. During the storm, the Annabelle gets beached in Dulvey, Louisiana, while sailing near the Gulf of Mexico. Local swamp man Jack Baker rescues Mia and Evelyn and takes them to his house. This would come to be a really bad idea, though. Evelyn takes over the Baker's household by spreading the mold, and she kind of just mind controls everyone, creating a living hell for them. Eventually, the Connections finally figure out where Evelyn was, and they set up a laboratory in the nearby salt mines with the help of Lucas Baker, who they contact after Evelyn and the mold took over the family property.
I got some for you. Looky what I've got. You know what this is for?
They're able to convince Lucas to help because bro just hated his family and the organization promised him suppressants for the mold virus that was in his system. But see, Lucas was really fucking twisted and killed everyone who was in the lab set up by the Connections. He then continued to send emails and messages back to the rest of the organization pretending like everything was fine. Over the next few years, Evelyn lured people to come to the property because she wanted to collect them like Pokemon cards so she could have one big family. Most of these people just didn't cut it though and were simply killed. But in 2017, there was one visitor who was going to cause her some troubles. You remember Mia Winters, the researcher who worked for the Connections? Well, back in the day, she had lied to her husband Ethan about what it was she did for work. After she went missing in 2014, Ethan was distraught since the only info he had on her disappearance was from a video recording she sent telling him to stay away. She recorded this back on the Annabelle. It had to have been awful for Ethan, getting a message like that from his wife when he only had a vague idea of what she did for work and having no real leads on where she could be. But in 2017, Ethan gets a call from Mia, who's being controlled by Evelyn at the time. In the call, she tells Ethan to come to the Baker family property. Ethan gets there and, long story short, he finds Mia. She switches between being Evelyn controlled and being herself, and then Jack Baker shows up and stomps Ethan's head in. Ethan dies. The end. Just kidding, the mold revives Ethan, but you don't even know this shit until the end of 8. Mold Revive Ethan progresses through the game, slaughtering the family members that just keep coming back to life through the mold. Also, since he is a mold man now, he can reattach his limbs with this funny heal juice. Eventually, Lucas Baker's sister, Zoe, is able to contact Ethan and gives him tips on how to survive. This leads to Ethan finding 2 samples of the failed D-type experiments, which he gives to Zoe so she can make a vaccine against Evelyn. Ethan uses one of the vaccines on Jack Baker, which, by the way, doesn't fucking do anything because he's still alive in the mold form in the DLC. But anyway, then, with one vaccine left, Ethan uses it on Mia instead of Zoe. Don't worry, in the DLC, her Giga Chat uncle saves her, so she ends up fine anyway. While Mia and Ethan are trying to escape, they run into the beached Annabelle, and they get ambushed by Evelyn. Mia finds a tissue sample of Evelyn on the ship, and then Mia saves Ethan from the mold in the boiler room, giving him the sample before she gets trapped with Evelyn in the process. Ethan then goes to the Connections outpost in the salt mine to make a neurotoxin with the sample, which can kill Evelyn. Back at the Baker house, you find out that this old grandma that's been present in the game was Evelyn the whole time. Ethan stabs her with the thing. She goes big mode. Ethan almost dies, but Chris Redfield shows up and tosses Ethan a mega cool bioweapon gun that one-shots her. In the end, Ethan and Mia make it out alive and go on to have mildly normal lives. For a little bit. Meanwhile, Chris goes into the Connections lab to go kill Lucas. He succeeds. It's around this time that Chris eventually comes to distrust the BSAA though, because they cover up the whole Baker incident entirely. Because of this, Chris forms his own independent Hound Wolf squad after 2018, which is relevant in the next game, Resident Evil Village. Also, if you thought Ethan's story was over, well, it's not. A few years later, and it is 2021. To nobody's surprise, Ethan is having a pretty hard time forgetting about what happened in Louisiana. He's now living with his wife Mia and their daughter Rose. But when Ethan brings up his troubles, Mia becomes really frustrated before Chris just breaks in like Mr. Kool-Aid and mag dumps her.
What? Why?
Chris and his men then kidnap Ethan and Rose, referring to them as important assets. Sometime later, Ethan ends up in a village after the van he was being transported in was attacked. See, the van was attacked by Mother Miranda, and this is the same village where she's been chilling for like a century. When Ethan wakes up, Rose is gone, and this is because your baby girl was Mother Miranda's primary target. At some point while heading through the village, Ethan meets a descendant of one of the 4 lords in the area, this guy named Heisenberg. But instead of cooking meth, he bends metal. Heisenberg kidnaps Ethan and brings him to meet the other lords, including the person behind it all, Mother Miranda. It's here where Ethan is sent through the many domains of the different lords, collecting different parts of Rose, because this merchant duke guy told Ethan that if he wants his daughter back, he's gonna have to get all the pieces. They come in the form of these specimen sample bottles with a label on it corresponding to each piece. And yes, if this sounds really messed up, it is. Basically what Miranda did was, after capturing Rose, she took the little baby to a ritual site, crystallized her, and then chopped her newly crystallized baby into 4 pieces. She split up the pieces among her 4 lords, who she trusted to protect said fragments. At the same time, Miranda wanted the 4 lords dealt with so they were out of her way and couldn't mess with her mission, hence why she let Ethan live initially and would observe how he dealt with them. She really just wanted Ethan to fight the lords for her, and even disguised herself as an old hag to keep feeding him lore to do just that. Naturally, to get all of Rose's pieces, Ethan has to kill the 4 lords. He kills the first 3, those being Alcina Dimitrescu, Donna Beneviento, and Salvatore Moro. Before we can get the final piece from Heisenberg, the guy actually attempts to reason with us, letting us know how strong Rose actually is and how he wants to use her to destroy Mother Miranda. But Ethan doesn't want to use his daughter as a weapon, so as a result of not cooperating, Heisenberg tries to kill him again. Once Ethan runs into Chris, the BSAA operative gone rogue explains to Ethan that he didn't actually kill Mia back at Ethan's house. That was Mother Miranda disguised as Mia, and the reason Chris kidnapped Rose and Ethan afterwards is because he thought that Miranda might have already infected them. After this lore drop, Ethan defeats Heisenberg with the assistance of Chris's engineering skills, and that's when Mother Miranda finally shows herself. She tells Ethan that Rose is Evelyn's complete form, and that she will be reborn as her own daughter, Eva. Then she rips out Ethan's heart. With Ethan dead, the game switches over to Chris's POV, where he's preparing to raid the village with his men. Fighting through the lichens, Chris finds the Megamycete and straps an explosive to it strong enough to level the entire village, but before he triggers it, he wants to finish off Mother Miranda. While on the way to her, he finds the real Mia in Miranda's lab, and they have a chat about what's been happening. Chris tells her that Ethan is unfortunately dead, but she responds telling him that Ethan is probably fine because he's special. Turns out Mia knew about Ethan's mold revival thing, which is crazy because that means she let a mold revived man nut in her. We switch back over to Ethan's POV and find he's experiencing some kind of dream sequence, speaking to Evelyn. She reveals the truth about how Ethan was murdered by Jack 3 years ago at the Baker house. Despite all of this, it doesn't faze Ethan nearly as much as he'd think. He just wants to save his daughter in the end. Waking up in the Duke's carriage, Ethan requests to be taken directly to Mother Miranda so he can finally finish this. Defeating Mother Miranda and taking his daughter back, Ethan meets Chris one last time. Ethan takes Chris's detonator and hands over his daughter, choosing to stay behind, sacrificing himself in the process. Mia breaks down after hearing the terrible news from Chris, and they finally escape the village. If you thought the game ended there, well, you'd be mistaken, because after the credits, we see teenage Rose visiting Ethan's grave, where she seems to be getting followed and protected by some of Chris's men. And this is where the DLC comes in. We time skip all the way to 2037. Yeah, 16 fucking years after everything that just happened with Ethan in the village and all that. We follow Rose as she has a conversation with one of Chris's Wolf Squad members, Charlie Graham. But see, this wasn't actually him. At some point, the Wolf Squad had acquired a piece of fungal root from Miranda's Megamycete and put it in a jar. Within this root, Miranda's consciousness somehow survived for all those 16 years. When Rose meets with Charlie Graham, she's actually just hallucinating. Because this guy, along with others in Chris's squad, had basically raised Rose, she considered Charlie a friend. Miranda used this to have his hallucination offer Rose an opportunity, one which could remove her powers. Rose jumped at this idea because she blamed her powers for how hard her life was, being ostracized and bullied by other kids her age as she was growing up. So she goes to the lab where the root is and enters a hallucinatory realm that Miranda and the mold seem to have created. Inside this weird hallucination world, Rose is accompanied by some kind of mysterious helper that communicates with her via writing. She gives it a name, Michael. She's told to find a purifying crystal. That's like her whole goal in this fake world. Rose pushes forward, finding Dan Schneider and witnessing a bunch of versions of herself getting brutally killed. Eventually, Rose is transported to a room that feels familiar to her. She finds a letter that was seemingly written by her dad, Ethan, but then Evelyn appears and drags her into yet another world. Evelyn is jealous of Rose and tries to kill her, but Rose is like, nah, fuck you, and puts the little shit in her place. In the third, final layer to the hallucinatory world, Rose finds the crystal, but then Mother Miranda appears and she's like, yes, I tricked you into all this, Charlie wasn't even there, and now I'm gonna make you my vessel for Eva. And just in the nick of time, before she can grab Rose, Ethan appears. He was the mysterious entity that Rose dubbed Michael, by the way. Ethan and Rose try and escape, but ultimately they can't, and Ethan's power is absorbed into Rose, which she uses to obliterate Miranda, killing the one who started it all. Ethan and Rose then have one final conversation before the world disintegrates.
You're so grown up now. And even though I wasn't there with you, I've always watched over you. I'm so very proud of you.
I love you too, Dad.
Rose wakes up from her trance, and in her hand, she realizes she's holding her dad's wedding ring. Rose goes to visit Ethan's grave on his birthday. Then she gets picked up by an agent and driven off in an SUV. And with that, we conclude Resident Evil 7 and 8, which happen to be actually really important to our next and final chapter, the one that many of you have probably been waiting for, Requiem. To preface the events of the game itself, most of which happen in 2026 and show the perspectives of Grace Ashcroft and Leon Kennedy, allow me to set up some key pieces of information that are huge lore reveals for the franchise. This stuff was revealed for the first time in 9 and has repercussions that go back many decades before the fall of Umbrella. By now we've established Spencer's obsession with immortality, which led to the many projects that happened across the world. Like so many of his other attempts at extending his life or creating a fountain of youth, his final project that was attempting to do this seemed to change something in him. Spencer was getting old by 1998. Whether from his mind decaying or not, Spencer had a bizarre change in heart. He genuinely gave up on trying to find the answer to immortality, accepting that he was going to die soon. At the same time, he adopted a baby girl named Grace. But before Spencer died, he finished one last project. This project he was able to keep mysterious because he never revealed to anyone its true purpose. The project was called Elpis. He misdirected its purpose as being related to mind controlling, selling the lie that Elpis was a bioweapon that could upset military balance on a global scale and could be used to control others. But its true purpose was something only Spencer knew. One of the huge lore drops we got in Requiem is that the missile that took out Raccoon City was actually orchestrated by the Connections. In collaboration with the US government, the Connections would pin the blame for the nuclear disaster on Spencer, causing the bloated company that Umbrella had become to fall apart. From there, they could absorb Umbrella's assets. But what is Elpis? Why did Spencer care so much about it? And what do we find out about the Connections? The answers to those questions and so many more is what we're going to discover by the end of 9, so strap in. Enter Grace Ashcroft, an FBI analyst and adopted daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, though I don't think she knows that she's adopted. It's October of 2026, and she's reading an article about how Raccoon City is having an extended lockdown all the way to 2040. Also, the US is 100% confirmed to be trading with bioweapons along with other nations. This is gonna be important later. Grace's boss grabs her, and he's like, yo, I need you to go to the Wrenwood Hotel where your mom fucking died in front of you. Grace is like, okay. So she goes to Wrenwood, a town right outside Raccoon City, by the way, and gets to the hotel where she finds some creepy shit, including a bunch of pictures of her. Then she finds this guy named Victor Gideon, who sounds suspiciously like Heath Ledger's Joker.
It hasn't been easy.
He's also fucking huge. He grabs Grace and makes her go ZZZ. Then we get the introduction to our other playable character in the game, Rose looking old. He's 49 and hotter than he's ever been. After he moved agencies, Leon at this point works for the Division of Security Operations, or the DSO. Run by the US government, of course. Alongside Leon, we have returning character Sherry Birkin, who we last saw in RE6. Both her and Leon are revealed to be suffering from the effects of the T-virus, which might be confusing, so allow me to explain. Basically, 10% of the population was immune to the T-virus exposure that swept over Raccoon City back in the day. It just so happened that people like Leon, Sherry, and Jill were in that 10%, which is why they were able to get bit without actually turning into zombies themselves. Clearly though, after decades following the exposure, some of their bodies were coming to feel the effects. Throughout Requiem, Leon's infection gets worse and is a driving force for you to push forward in the hopes that you can cure it and save his life. While Leon is driving through Renwood, investigating Victor Gideon, he happens to spot the guy casually carrying Grace Ashcroft over his shoulder on the sidewalk. Leon then gives chase. Victor slows him down by infecting people in the streets, but that doesn't stop our boy.
He is so hot.
Leon then finds out Victor probably took Grace to the Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center that he purchased decades prior. Naturally, Leon heads there to investigate. Grace regains consciousness and finds she is upside down with a needle in her arm. Ugh. Oh. Made that. Oh, smart. Bro, she is so much smarter than I am. I would not have been able to figure that shit out. From here, Grace leaves the room and explores her surroundings. While Grace is getting chased by this horrifying monster, Leon shows up at the hospital and absolutely aurifarms everyone, waiting 3 business days while he stares at a zombie holding a chainsaw, which proceeds to obliterate this lady. I don't know why Leon let that happen. What the fuck? He fights through the hospital till he finds Grace, saving her from the freaky tall monster, which is known as the Girl. Then a gate falls down and separates the two. Leon tosses his insanely OP gun, the Requiem, to Grace, and then he gets trapped with Victor, who proceeds to choke him out. From there, Grace has to fight her way through the hospital. Grace finds a little girl named Emily, who's blind, and together the two of them nearly escape the hospital in a helicopter, aided by this pilot named Harry, but the helicopter crashes and Harry gets impaled by a tree. Meanwhile, Gideon was feeling up Leon.
You are gonna be my Discord kin, Leon.
What the
And Leon escapes, then finding Grace running away from zombies with Emily. He assists her with a sniper rifle, and the two finally manage to meet up at last. But something is wrong. Emily is bleeding out from an injury she got in the helicopter crash. After having to finish off the hulking girl monster thing, Grace returns to Emily, but finds the little girl is dead. She tries to do chest compressions on her, but it doesn't work.
I'm sorry about your daughter. We'll give her 5 big booms. Boom! Boom!
Suddenly, Emily revives and becomes a ghoulish abomination. Leon has to put her down. Grace is so distraught by everything that she leaves Leon behind and is approached by Gideon and a new character, Zeno. It's about now that I explain 2 important facts about Victor Gideon. First, he refers to Spencer as his master. He wishes to follow in his master's footsteps and see his goals to the end. Second, Gideon and Zeno work for the Connections, the same organization we talked about back in RE7 and 8. For whatever reason, the Connections really want to release Elpis, Spencer's final project that he didn't want anyone to have. Zeno and Gideon ask Grace to come with them to the ruins of Raccoon City, and considering how done she is with everything by now, she just kinda agrees. Leon himself pursues Elpis further, which leads him to Raccoon City as well. Sherry tells him over comms that there's nothing on Elpis in the CIA or Pentagon databases, which is very suspicious, and continues to tell us that the US government is evil. This is further confirmed by Sherry requesting higher clearance, but being promptly told to shut down her investigations entirely. Leon shows up at Raccoon City, and at first it looks completely abandoned and untouched, as if nobody had been here for decades. We quickly learn, though, that this couldn't be further from the truth. Leon finds evidence of the BSAA having set up bases of operation, even dropping supply-carrying cargo containers in the area. In video footage he recovers off of a BSAA corpse, we see that Zeno had killed this squad not long before. Also, there's a bunch of zombies here that look straight out of Mad Max. Leon finds a motorcycle in one of the BSAA cargo containers, and blowing open a gate, he's able to progress towards the central part of the city. Out of nowhere, bro is ambushed by Victor Gideon, and we get this rather out of place motorcycle sequence, which felt a bit jank. They do a little motorcycle joust, and Gideon loses, falling off a highway and seemingly dying, but come on. We all know he's not dead. Leon makes it to the center and arrives at a place he's quite familiar with, the RPD. This is probably a much bigger deal for those of you who have been fans of the series for many years.
It's on you now.
But for me, I was just born, okay? This part is actually really sentimental. Leon has some flashbacks, and we see a message the cops wrote about how they need to give young Leon a warm welcome, as he was just transferring to the station as a new recruit when everything went to shit in the city. Leon finds Zeno and Grace in the RPD, but Zeno sends this, like, Mr. X clone after Leon. Fed up with all this shit, Leon kills Mr. X, heads down really deep into the underground, fights some fuck-ass plants, and at last enters a facility we've never seen up till now. Ark. Bro, I tried to leave Ark, but it won't let me forget. I should probably fill you in on what the hell this facility is all about. The Ark, which is referring to Noah's Ark, of course, was a facility Umbrella owned that was supposed to be totally hidden from both the public and any potential rival organizations. It was also the place where Spencer contained Elpis. He didn't want Elpis to get out, seemingly until he was ready. But as we know, his life was put to an end by Mr. Wesker before he could release Elpis. Leon's condition is getting even worse. Fighting through the Ark, he eventually clashes axes with this super soldier named Hunk, who's apparently a fan favorite that's been around since RE2. This guy was actually part of the squad who killed William Birkin back in the day, and as of now, he's been protecting Elpis. Leon kills Hunk, though bro is probably not dead, and then Leon carries on into the central core area where Elpis lays dormant. Zeno basically explains that the Connections were desperate to get their hands on Elpis after infiltrating the facility, and their hunch was that Grace would somehow know the password needed in order to release Elpis. If the wrong password were to be entered, Elpis would be destroyed, hence why they were so obsessed with finding the password. Grace is like, I don't know the password, what the fuck? But Zeno doesn't believe her. Leon shows up and grabs Grace, and the two end up in a lower part of the facility where they have to split up and find more lore and shit. Grace finds a bunch of lore on a floppy disk that her mom Alyssa hid behind a painting way back when, and this thing reveals everything. On the disk, we find an interview Alyssa did with Spencer, where he basically explains this.
What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
My research opened Pandora's box, unleashing disaster upon the world. I was wrong, and I am plagued by guilt. Happiness cannot be achieved at the expense of others. I only hope it serves as a requiem for those who have passed.
After those huge lore drops, Grace sees Leon on the monitors, and he's not looking so good. So she rushes through a door, ending up in some weird Spencer room where we find his old wheelchair. And then Grace finally finds Leon again, who's basically minutes from death due to his infection. Grace and Leon make it back to the Elpis terminal, where Zeno's just kind of waiting for them. The Elpis computer then asks the question, what does the creator desire? It is here that Grace is presented with a choice. She can either destroy Elpis, like Leon asked her to do, or she can release it. This gives us the two endings to the game. If Grace decides to destroy Elpis, she types destruction in the prompt, and what follows is pretty much exactly what she typed. The facility collapses, and Leon sacrifices himself while Grace escapes. Grace takes an elevator out, and the game ends. So what about the other endings? Well, if you release Elpis instead, then when presented with the question of what the creator desires, Grace types hope. Elpis is opened up, and we finally get to see what it was all along. A cluster of vials is revealed, and Zeno grabs one, quickly injecting himself since he assumes it'll make him strong. But it doesn't. Instead, as the characters connect the dots in real time, the answer is made clear. Elpis is a vaccine. And it's not just any vaccine, it's a vaccine that destroys all viruses. Zeno realizes his mistake as his knockoff Wesker powers fade away. At that moment, a surviving Victor Gideon enters the room. Zeno is pissed at him, telling Gideon his master was a dumbass, to which Gideon responds by decapitating the man. It's at this point we can reveal what Victor Gideon actually is. Turns out, he's a tyrant, but not just any. Gideon is a nemesis, some kind of alternate version to the one in Resident Evil 3. Clearly one big difference being that Gideon actually speaks and communicates. He reasons at the very least. This also explains why Gideon calls Spencer his master, because Spencer literally made him. Gideon seems to think Elpis was genius, realizing its outcome and the anarchy that would follow. The tyrant then stabs Grace with his tentacle, and Grace quickly injects Leon with a vial of Elpis, which rapidly heals his infection. Gideon yoinks a vial and then activates some kind of destruction sequence as he wants to bring it all down. Most likely, it seems like Gideon misinterpreted Spencer's wish here, thinking Spencer made Elpis for him to have. With such leverage in Gideon's hands, he'd be unstoppable. With no viruses, governments around the world would flounder because of their reliance on bioweapons, and Gideon could be the arbiter of all of it. Because Leon and Grace are stuck down in this hole with Gideon, Bro decides he needs to kill them because they could potentially get in his way. This is where Leon and Gideon have their final showdown. Gideon evolves, because, he's a nemesis, and Leon finishes him off. Grace and Leon, realizing there's no way out, just kind of sit it out, expecting everything to end as the facility collapses. The lights go out.
Leon S. Kennedy?
Enter Hound Wolf Squad. So Leon and Grace survive, and guess who also survives? Emily. Leon basically didn't hit any of her vitals, and I guess her real body was inside the monster after she had transformed. It's a little too convenient, but hey, I'll let it pass because she's adorable and did not deserve any of this shit. Over the next few weeks, news reports are all over the situation, many hinting at the government being to blame for Umbrella's bankruptcy, as well as being responsible for so many cover-ups. Furthermore, there are theories that an unknown organization has been in the shadows controlling the US government. Of course, the president denies everything. So if you're like me, you probably have a lot of questions. One of the big ones for me is, what's the deal with the Ark? Well, once you beat Requiem, you get access to Grace's 60-page report, and this thing is super useful. Here's the gist of what we learn, and a current up-to-date recap of the events involving Umbrella, Spencer, even James Marcus, the connections, and the US government. Up until October 2026 in-universe, the general public knew little about what actually happened in Raccoon City. With the events of Requiem, Grace cracks it wide open. All this time, since 1998, Raccoon City had been used as a hub for the production and trafficking of bioweapons. The following information reveals the truth of the incident. While it is absolutely true that Spencer relentlessly pursued the evolution of humanity by developing bioweapons using the most inhumane and illegal methods imaginable, the man was used as a convenient scapegoat for parties who would commit more acts of violence than he ever could in a lifetime. The involvement of rivals was inevitable because in the 1980s, the conflict between Spencer and Marcus would grow volatile. Spencer had Marcus demoted and took control of his T-virus research. Furthermore, Umbrella built a massive underground facility beneath Raccoon City called ARC. It went on to become their administrative command center for research. It was also in 1980 that the first mention of Elpis is found in records. Things began to go awry for Umbrella behind the scenes when in 1986, James Marcus received a $30 million donation from what we only know as F Foundation, which FBI sources proved was a puppet organization from the Connections. Speaking of which, in Grace's report, she clarifies the truth about the Connections. They're said to be a criminal organization that various government agencies have been sounding the alarm against for years. Evidence suggests the Connections sought involvement with Umbrella's central operations. More documents show their connection to James Marcus's protege, Brandon Bailey. It's implied that since Marcus was killed in 1988 at Spencer's order, Brandon Bailey then took over his role as the mole within Umbrella to keep feeding the Connections the information that they wanted. By the 1990s, Umbrella was growing far too large to control. Spencer, in his age, just couldn't keep up. Even if he wasn't old, how could he? The organization was just huge. This resulted in poor management and disasters happening at various Umbrella-owned facilities around the world. As Umbrella agents also infiltrated the US government, this further meant a loss of control for Spencer. Even with everything going to shit though, Spencer finished his work at ARC, his work on Elpis. In a confiscated message Spencer had sent during this period, he said the following: Tricell, HCF, the family, and Umbrella. Elpis shall bring it all to an end. He literally took the true purpose of Elpis to the grave, and it was assumed based on what little he had said about it, that Elpis was a massively powerful, unprecedented bioweapon. Of course, anyone who thought this couldn't be further from the truth. Another mysterious part of Requiem is a sequence I didn't mention yet, which happens about 3/4 of the way through the game. It involves an orphanage that is actually the same one seen back in RE2. In the sequence, you play as a little girl, one of the test subjects in one of Spencer's immortality projects. The orphanage appeared to, at one point, have a bunch of at least slightly normal, albeit lab-grown girls that looked pretty similar. But, well, during the sequence, something seems to have gone horribly wrong. Creepy, undead girls, prior orphans who had seemingly died and then come back to life, popping out of their coffins, take over the orphanage and they kill the adults, taunting you, the only seemingly normal little girl, along the way. Weirdly, this whole thing doesn't seem super connected to Grace though, because based on the year the sequence happened, Grace couldn't have even been born by then. Based on Grace's report though, and documentation, it was in the 1990s after Spencer finished Elpis that he ceased involvement in the orphanage project. In the late 90s, William Birkin took over the orphanage research, and in 98, the researcher turned against Spencer, leading of course to yet another leak of the T-virus during that year. By the time Raccoon City was overrun, the government claimed to launch the missile to stop the infection, but that's not why they did it. Behind the scenes, it was discovered that the connections took many steps to separate the government from Umbrella. They went one step further by pressuring the government to missile strike the city. The connections wanted to acquire Umbrella's assets, and the asset they were most insistent on getting? Elpis. So right before they orchestrated the missile strike on the city, the connections took over ARC, securing Elpis for themselves. By 2004, Umbrella was prosecuted and forced into bankruptcy. The blame was placed on its CEO, Spencer. From there, ARC was used by the connections and likely the US government as a center for research for both making as well as distributing bioweapons to parties around the world. Though we can't know his true feelings, Spencer shows signs of remorse in one of the last recorded pieces of video evidence of the man, taken by Alyssa Ashcroft. It's possible he truly felt regret about all that he had done, especially based on what he says here.
Happiness cannot be achieved at the expense of others.
It could be interpreted that Spencer finished Elpis as an act of atonement, but it also could be interpreted that it was the only thing he could truly do to get revenge on everyone who had used him and the viruses he had created. It was his only way to take them down with him, to wipe it all away. In the end, the only one who could possibly know what he truly felt was Spencer himself. In an after-credits bonus sequence, we see that Grace is doing well, continuing her work at the FBI. She's also, since then, adopted Emily. The girl might even be able to see now, since based on this photo, her eyes look different from before. Last, we see an establishing shot of the Raccoon City crater. It cuts to a dead BSAA agent as unknown soldiers walk past the corpse. One of the unknown soldiers remarks how they neutralized remaining BSAA agents and were trying to grab the objective before the Wolf Squad arrived. Then it cuts to black. Probably the objective he's referring to is some lost sample of Elpis, and this, along with a lot of the news media bits we've seen in Requiem, hint towards the next game in the series being centered around the US government and whatever secret agency is likely controlling it. As a super new Resident Evil fan, I gotta say, I feel lucky. It's been a real joy to cover this series, even among the less than desirable entries. Resident Evil as a whole is a franchise that has genuinely continued to slap to this day. Moist Critical put it well in his video on Requiem when he said this:
I know Resident Evil like Elon Musk knows ketamine. So when I say what I'm about to say here, just know, this means something, man. I think Resident Evil Requiem is a top 5 Resident Evil game.
Given what Requiem hints at for the next game, I'm excited, because it's about time we finally corner the big bad that has been so pivotal in being not only aware of the countless atrocities committed with bioweapons, but has actively used and traded them on the global market. None other than the United States government. It's especially cathartic to see Resident Evil going in this direction, given where we're at in real life with our absolutely wicked administration, which, as of making this video on March 1st, 2026, just started a war with Iran, killing their supreme leader. So much for not wanting to start wars. It wasn't even that long ago either that we captured Venezuela's president and brought him to our country, which violated constitutional and international law. All the while, we have an organization called ICE that is actively capturing immigrants while brutally killing anyone, including US citizens, who even remotely stand in their way, and none of the thugs who are killing people are even prosecuted for their actions. Needless to say, if Resident Evil 10 is going to make the US government lore accurate, they're going to need more than just bioweapons, because as it stands, our real government is infinitely more dangerous, corrupt, and outright evil than anything these games have portrayed them to be thus far. But with all of that said, what did you think about Requiem? What do you think about Resident Evil? Where do you think Capcom is going to go next with the franchise? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, click the subscribe button. It's free. I want to give a huge thanks to my patrons and YouTube members, seen right here. Thank you for your support, guys. You're the best. And yeah, just you can click on a video here, or watch my playlist for all the story videos here. And yeah, that's about it. Bye.